Arrow. We talked about this. You don't watch Arrow, or you haven't gotten
into this yet. Not yet. I'm going to. I'm not there yet.
You're not there yet. Too many shows. Too many shows.
Too many.
Too little time.
Too many great, awesome shows. Not enough time in the day.
I love Arrow. That is my show. And I noticed that DC's making movies, but the characters that they've already created in the TV DC universe, like Green Arrow, like The Flash, guys in the Suicide Squad, they're not using those characters for the movie, or they're not using those specific actors that play those roles on TV. They're not being used in the movies. How do you feel about that?
At first, when they were doing Smallville, they didn't want to get Batman into it because of what they were doing with The Dark Knight. Or at the time it was Batman Begins, but they didn't want to intermix that together. And I kind of get it why. Or rather, I do get why, but at the time, I didn't really understand it, so it kind of bummed out for me because that would have been awesome to see Bruce Wayne and Lex talk with Clark. Now that we're a little bit further ahead in terms of, not rights, but how storylines work, it makes sense to me because it kind of works like with the Avengers. When they have their individual movies, it's not exactly to the comics because of the storylines. You can only fit so much storyline into an hour, 2 hour movie, or an hour show or half an hour show into the movie. You can only do so much. And what I figured, what they want to do is they don't want to confuse people like, okay, so this is what he does on the show, but then when he gets called up to action, this is what he does. They don't want to mix the storylines or whatever between the movie versus the show, because the show is, if you think about it, the show is like a comic book. You have a comic book, then you have another comic book, then you have another comic book. All three comics are the same hero, but could be a different adventure. But they don't necessarily follow each other with what they do here versus what they did there. Like, for an example, in here, let's say, for an example, in Arrow, he fights Deathstroke. He gets this crazy scar on his chest that affects him for maybe a couple episodes. He can't shoot the arrow correctly. That would affect how he reacts into these other comics or the movie. So that's kind of why they don't like to mix the show with the movie in terms of actors and things like that, and storyline as well. So it kind of sucks because you fall in love with this with this actor, and then to see another actor play the same character, they don't play it the same way. It gets confusing, or like, oh man, I like him better. I wish they had him there. That kind of comes into play.
It does make sense now that you explain it that way.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Because then, obviously, once the movie comes out, you kind of have to explain the character's actions in the movie
with the TV show, or vice versa.
Or you have to roll over.
Yeah. And it's like with the Man of Steel.
Sense.
It's like with the Man of Steel. So Henry Cavill plays Superman in the movie, but who is it? Tom Welling, who plays Clark in Smallville. If they had brought Tom Welling to play Superman in Man of Steel has to be like 100% following the show. Like, this is what happened in the show, so he can't do anything different from what happened in the show to make him in the movie. So that's kind of how it works with when, for an example, with Dawn of Justice, when that comes out, you can't change Superman into what he did to the show. You have to base it off now what Man of Steel was. With Batman, you can create a new story. With all the other characters, you can create a new story. But if you were to add Arrow, you have to have him follow what he does on the show. And maybe you don't want to do that, because if I'm directing Dawn of Justice, I had nothing to do with Arrow, and I have Green Arrow on my movie, I now have to watch the movie, I have to follow that content, and then what if I don't want him to do what he did on the show? What if I want him to do something different? That's what...
Then it also restricts them when they're writing the story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so to prevent that restriction, that's why they get different characters and different storylines and things like that from show versus the movie.
Well, now I'm not as upset. that works.
Okay.
It puts it all into perspective.
Alan stamped approved.
Alan stamped approved.